So the way of introduction, the Institute of Economic Affairs is a think tank that promotes debate and dialogue on public policy issues. And we've actually done some work around issues of gender, or work around promotion of gender equality in the past. And most of this work that we've done in the past has been on analysis of the budget from or through gender lens. So we've done some work in the past on gender responsive budgeting. And this work has not necessarily been consistent. But also the other piece of work that we've done that is quite popular is that we did some study on the cost of implementing the two-thirds gender rule. So the idea of engaging in this partnership was to try and enhance our consistency on work around issues to promote gender equality or work that informs closing of gender gaps. Now, in this morning, being the month of International Women's Day, we'd like to continue these conversations about embracing equality. And just to know that IEA is actually a partner in this project on women economic empowerment. And the main piece of work that we're doing on our project is specifically in regard to gender responsive budgeting, tracking the effects of budget and public spending on women economic empowerment. The other thing that we are doing as partners in this project is basically to provide support towards advocacy and communication to the rest of the partners within the hub. And I will obviously allow our Professor Waudo to speak more in details about the project.
Let me say very grateful for the Institute for Economic Affairs for organizing this event. Since we started 2.5 years ago, we have been partners in the research process at KUWEE. And I'm glad that this event is just coming after 2 weeks ago when we held the International Women's Day at Kenyatta University. We had 2 events. One event was to have a webinar on the 7th of March. The second event we had on the 8th of March to celebrate the International Women's Day. Now, looking at today's theme, we at Kenyatta University, we have actually been embracing gender equity and equality. And we have done it through several channels. One, we have a teaching department for sociology, gender, and developmental studies, where we capacity build students from diploma level to PhD level. Number two, we have the Center for Gender Equity and Empowerment, which is mandated to mainstream gender within university operation. We do it on a daily basis. Now, 2 years ago, we were privileged to get this project on what works to improve women economic empowerment in Kenya. Through this research, we have done about 11 concepts, working on the 12th concept on childcare across several sectors of the economy. And through this research, we have actually captured both qualitative and quantitative, because prior to the project, we realized there was that lack of data, limited data, gender data. And through this project now, we have actually attempted to collect information both qualitatively and quantitatively. And I'm glad to say now we have had the woman's voice, Wanjiku's voice, through the qualitative research. And we have written several case studies which we are going to share, which as academicians, we usually focus on the quantitative statistics, and we miss out a whole lot of information about that Wanjiku out there. So I'm glad that this forum is coming now, just to scale what we have done in terms of collection of data. Most of the studies, except one on childcare, we have collected data, we are writing, we have shared, and this is one forum we are also going to be just engaging. And as we engage, we need to actually have some research that we can now upscale to a larger population. Sometimes for us academicians, we are accused for talking to ourselves. Or for, so we will not be talking to ourselves. So we need actually to upscale it to what people out there so that we can make impact. The purpose of the we have is actually impact. This project is going to be to an end, we should be able to make some difference. Currently, as inform the participants here, we are making some policy inroads because for each of these studies, we have actually come up with 1 or 2 policies. These policies, we have engaged with the stakeholders at different levels, and we hope by 2025, we will actually have had several governments, local, the county governments and national government have uptake of these policies we have generated from these studies. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
My name is Regina Mwada. I'm going to be talking a little about just about 4 of the projects that we've been researching on. Professor Wauda said we have 12, but I'll just discuss just about 4 and highlight the main findings. The project title is actually the project title is entitled Initiatives for What Works to Improve Women's Economic Empowerment. We are interested in finding out what works for women's economic empowerment. The hub itself was actually established through a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to generate this evidence. The rationale for the studies is to address a weakness between women's economic empowerment policies, programs, and gender data. So there's always a weakness. In fact, if you go, for instance, to the economic survey of KNBS, you find that there's data, but some of that gender data you want is not there. What is the goal? To promote women's economic empowerment through policy-driven research. We have 6 objectives: to enhance women's engagement and influence in all spheres of the economy, to increase women's employability, to prevent and reduce sexual and gender-based violence, to construct women's economic empowerment indices for tracking progress made in empowering women, to promote gender-responsive budgeting, to strengthen capacity to conduct policy-driven research and generate gender data and statistics that actually drive policy and advance the well-being of women. What is the overall outcome for this? The overall outcome is that the evidence we get is used by government, by implementing agencies, by the private sector and other players to shape policy, so that then policy is shaped from perspective of knowledge with existing data. Thank you. There are 3 thematic areas of our studies. The first thematic area focuses on women's roles in the public and private sector. In this, we have 5 studies: women's participation in management and leadership. And this one actually focuses in women in the public service, in the national government and the county government, asking women being in the women represented in the public service. There is also another study looking at women in corporate governance. The other one is looking at women in manufacturing. And the fourth is actually constructing women's economic empowerment index for Kenya. And the fifth actually looks at gender responsive budgeting, tracking the effects of budgets and public spending on women's economic empowerment. As you know, you cannot plan and not put money into it. So if you don't put money into it, it won't happen. The second thematic area is women's skilling and mentoring, where we have three studies. The first one looks at the integration of transferable skills to basic and TVET levels. The second one looks at improving women's work and readiness to employability. The third one looks at lifelong learning for women. Go to the next. The third thematic area actually looks at barriers to women's performance and what is it that hinders them from delivering. The first being a study that looks at effectiveness of GBV mitigation and prevention. The second looks at gender impacts of Kenya government policy response to COVID-19. And the third is enhancing women's market participation and child development through a creche program. This one actually looks at does removing care work from women enhance their productivity. The fourth study looks at women's participation. Thank you. These are our key partners, Tharaka Nithi County. We have Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, and we have Institute of Economic Affairs, our partners. Keep going. Okay, these are other partners. I won't go through them. They are both local and international. Keep going. What do we expect out of our research outputs? We have come up with policy briefs already. We have some policy briefs that focus on, we have completed policy briefs. We have shared this as a stakeholder engagement. All the ones we have listed here are shared with the stakeholders. We have also shared with the government as well as other partners in forums like this. So we have a brief looking at how we tackle GBV, women participation in leadership and management in government, both national and county government. We actually did an audit on that. We are also looking at effective of, if there is a policy brief looking at effectiveness of women in manufacturing. And all the studies have actually done some policy brief out of their research. I don't want to go into detail into this because I want to straight away go into the findings. Let us begin with the first one that I mentioned to you, which is women's participation in management and leadership. This is a gender audit of the national government, the 22 ministries. And what did we find out? That the proportion of women in the public service declined from by the year 2020, where statistics reveal that in 2010, the audit covered 2010 to 2020, women shifted from 24%. By 2020, women were 24% overall, and men were 75.99%. Women with a first degree in the national government increased from 27% to 45%, while the proportion of men with a first degree in the same cadres declined within the same period, 2010 to 2020. Similarly, women with a master's degree increased, while men with a master's degree declined. The trend for 10 years shows that the percent of women who remained single steadily increased from 49% to 63%. And our question that we are asking now is, do women sacrifice family and care work for career progression? We are not sure. We are still finding out. Here is the job cadres, as you know, in the national government. The proportions at entry, again, we find that they are in 2010, as you can see here, women were at 41%. But you can see that trend of decline all the way to that 1% through the years to 2020, while the men increased. And at the same time, you've noted women's education increased, women's so it is not clear where do women's education go up, yet they are not also going up in terms of cadres of promotion and entry into the job market. Representation by gender at this is the middle management. You can see a slight increase from 27 to 34% by women. Keep going, please. And again, you find at the upper levels, that is where key decisions are made. There is, you can see in 2010, 23%, men 77%, increasing to 29%, and men 71%, a slight increase, which is not significant. Keep going. Let us go to the other study that we have looked at, which is women in manufacturing sector. Women in manufacturing found that this program is done between Kenya Association of Manufacturers and Women Manufacturers. And the study found that there was an improved sense of, the WIN program improved the leadership skills of the women participants in that program, facilitated utilization of voice. So women gained voice and agency generally, and they enhanced their business skills. Women reported limited control over household productive assets, even when they were manufacturers themselves. They had limited control over household productive assets. They did, for instance, own the car in their name or a piece of plot. They did have that. They couldn't sell some property, so they had limited control and could not make exclusive decisions about business and household income. Most women have gained power over time in agency, but with significant variations. One of the other things that's coming up from this study, and it is not here as a slide there, is that women in manufacturing have a problem with licensing. They are not able to know exactly how many licenses do I buy for this kind of business, and they keep telling us, we want a one-stop shop like Huduma, where I go, I buy, I pay all my licenses, and I go. Because they buy a license today, and another one, they get three, but then in the process, they realize that somebody comes and says, you don't have this license. So they have to go under the later. So again, the issue of information is actually an issue with women in manufacturing. Okay, let's go to the gender responsive budgeting. This study is actually conducted by Institute of Economic Affairs in partnership with us. And what did they find out? That only 8 state departments or ministries have initiatives that are sensitive to women's economic empowerment. And we have 22. The National Gender and Equality Commission, the Department for Social Protection, they are listed there. Those are among the 8 that are the most sensitive ministries. And basically, these are the ones that deal with the Gender Commission, Department for Social Protection, the Ministry for Gender. So where is housing? Where is roads? All those. For the realization of maintenance of gender issues at both governance advocacy should go beyond the 8 departments to all MPAs. There is an implicit bias in policy where comprehensive general economic policy and law are very minimal in implementation, including the gender policy, which is in existence. The public perception of GRB, of gender responsive budgeting, women empowerment initiatives are seen as synonym to gender responsive budgets, feminism. So it's not well taken, well perceived. There is lack of gender disaggregated data. Again, that is one of the reasons why we are here. And this limitation, the lack of gender disaggregated data is a limitation towards assessing the impact of various women economic empowerment initiatives. And you can see in the graphs how it goes, and it's illustrated here. Keep going to the next one. We have also carried out a study at KUWEE Hub looking at, I mentioned barriers to women's engagement in productive work. And this particular work looked at sexual and gender-based violence. And the study found that majority, 90.6%, took time off women took off time of their daily routines to seek help. And women lose work in terms of working hours because of SGBV. Survivors suffered physical violence, psychological or emotional violence, economic violence, sexual violence, social violence, including intimate partner violence. Husbands and boyfriends were identified as the primary perpetrators. Majority of the survivors sought psychological counseling, medical help, and legal assistance. And you can see the statistics. What is worrying actually is that the ones seeking legal assistance are quite few, 46.9%. And there is a strong correlation between gender-based violence and economic disempowerment. Then we are also partnering with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. As you know, the studies of Kenya National Bureau of Statistics tend to take a long period, like they can go for an whole year. So what they have done, they have completed, and we are partnering again in this, they've completed a study on the Kenya Continuous Household Survey. And that is already out, we can look at that. Again, there's gender data, but there could be more gender data, gender disaggregated data. They are currently analyzing data on a basic report on women's economic empowerment. They are also completing a report on women's economic index, which we will be sharing with you later once they have completed and we are able to share their findings. I hope I'll get time. Thank you.
We've run through a summary of the we have, the projects that are being undertaken under it. And then, of course, we've gone through the highlights of findings for the 4 main studies. So now we'd like to, being conscious again, of course, that 2 weeks ago we had the International Women's Day. We've seen that some progress is made. Obviously, there are certain things that need to be improved upon. I'll invite my colleague, Tanya Jatani, who works at the Institute of Economic Affairs in our Public Finance Management Program, to give us a presentation on Kenya's progress towards gender equality.
My name is Darby Jatani. As introduced, I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I work under the Public Finance Management Program, and I'm also a researcher under our partnership with the Kenyatta University Women Economic Empowerment Hub. And as explained by Dr. Regina, in partnership with Kenyatta University, we have IEA is undertaking a study on gender responsive budgeting, and what we've done is just to track government spending on women empowerment initiatives. And while trying to track what the effect of this expenditure is on improving key women indicators, it was quite a challenge. And this is just to build on what Dr. Regina has mentioned. Data challenge has limited even that study to a lot of extent, and we had to revise our methodologies quite often. So this is just to reiterate the data challenges mentioned by Dr. Regina. In terms of tracking Kenya's progress towards gender equality and women empowerment, we look at the legal and policy background that informs our discussions today. Again, we look at the progress made in terms of women and the economy across different areas. We also do a regional comparison just to see how we fare when compared to our to other East African countries, and we will conclude with some recommendations. In terms of the legal background, obviously the right to equal access to economic, political, and social opportunities is based and founded on the Constitution of Kenya, and under Chapter 4, Article 27 on equality and freedom from discrimination. And the Constitution further goes ahead to mandate that to give full effect to the realization of the rights stated under the Bill of Rights, the Parliament will legislate affirmative action measures, policies, and these are just examples to ensure that any disadvantage suffered by past groups that suffered past discrimination are catered for in the current policies and budgetary allocation. And definitely women were categorized as people who were past, who suffered past discrimination, especially in areas of economic and political opportunities. And we have seen various affirmative action and also the two-third gender rule to incorporate more women into both positions in elective and also nominative and in the public sector. So that forms the foundation. And just to mention, we've also seen those affirmative actions and the policies. One challenge is that they are very limited to selected ministries, departments, and agencies. The Constitution does not give the scope, but it is expected that because this discrimination was suffered across all sectors, then you would expect that the affirmative action and the policies and government spending will also reflect the same. But from our analysis, we've noted that these policies are seen as sector specific, and only certain sectors have policies related to gender sensitive. And we also see the National Gender and Equality Commission here, who are also present today in the House. But again, GEC has undertaken studies to show our progress in gender mainstreaming. But again, the much they can do is give recommendations, and we do not see this being taken up across other departments to ensure that gender mainstreaming is not only across certain social sectors that is considered. Again, obviously, these sectors employ women majorly, and also women benefit a lot from these sectors. But also, there is need to ensure that we do not, as Dr. Regina mentioned, implicit bias. This happens mostly because women issues have been classified and segregated into specific sectors, and that again is as a result of that implicit bias, and we need to be really explicit in our policies, in our budget allocation, to ensure that these policies again cut across all sectors and not just the ones that we've managed to highlight from our studies. In order to inform the government policies for affirmative actions, policies, and budgetary allocation. Obviously, there was need to be informed by data, and we've seen under Vision 2030, Medium Term Plan 1, Medium Term Plan 2, all the way to 3, where there has been the commitment towards ensuring that our data collection is disaggregated by gender in order to promote effective policy formulation. And you can already tell from the collection of the data that it isn't incorporated. I would expect, for example, that a policy that requires the disaggregated gender data is one that will incorporate this across all documents, all policy documents, all budget documents. But it's like we have a separate budget to collect data on gender disaggregated. And the goal and the recommendation here obviously is, instead of having separate applications to segregate data, maybe incorporating collection of data disaggregation even in our own program-based budgeting at that level, so that that in turn fits into the higher level planning instead of having this. And you can tell that most of this data is outdated. Into data from the Kenya Traffic Health Survey, and you can really that then presents a challenge of are we the current challenges or the challenges that the past is presenting. So again, this is we've seen a lot of progress in the efforts towards having disaggregated data in order to inform policy, but is it enough? I think it's not yet enough. So now we go into the women and the economy. I'm aware that people in this room are very conversant with the policy and the legal backing. So that was just to build a foundation and give a summary of, in terms of the policies, how far we have. And I think the policies are quite sufficient in terms of the laws and the policies to of the summary of the trends across 4 key indicators. We have political empowerment here, and you can tell from this chart, political empowerment being at the lowest level of this chart. This is where we have made the least progress. So this is data from the Global Gender Gap Index, and this is an annual index that tracks parity, gender parity, and they do this across 4 key areas, which is economic participation, education, health, and political empowerment. And it's often quite updated, and it takes advantage of data from various countries in order to build the comparison. Again, the indicators are not as wide and variable as it is in the KNBS Women Empowerment Index, because this compares 109 countries, 150 countries, and it has been increasing as more countries improve their data collection. And because of standardization, then the indicators are a bit limited, and this is where local index such as the Women Empowerment Index by KNBS can then come in to provide a variety of indicators to actually track gender gap closed across these 4 areas. So this shows a trend from 2017 to 2022, and we can follow, given that elections only come every 5 years, so you would expect that the trend in political empowerment doesn't change much, but also under this political empowerment index indicator, they also look at positions such as ministerial positions, which again hardly change often across the 5 years. So this is most likely we will see maybe any differences given the 2022 elections in the next publication of the Global Gender Gap Index. Again, the other area where we've made the least progress is economic participation and opportunity, but we can see there is an improvement from 2020 all the way to 2022. Again, another challenge with institutions that provide data is the lived interpretation to the researchers and the academicians and people in policies and ourselves IEA, in order to analyze, interpret, and understand. So there is a trend in economic participation, and my colleagues and I at the IEA were trying to make sense of this growth in economic participation from 2020 to 2022. Again, the Global Gender Gap Index measures how much gap. It does not look at the levels of economic development in a country. It looks at given this standard of economic opportunities, then how much of these opportunities are available to women, how much of that is available to men, and maybe displacement effect of COVID-19, or maybe again, more women have had to come back into the labor force market, given that COVID disrupted a lot of income, and maybe the ones who even had the luxury of staying at home now had to rejoin the labor force again, because there is some sudden reduction in the gender gap that existed between men and women before COVID-19. So in 2022, it's 0.811. And the closer you are to one, the closer you are to achieving gender parity. And as you move towards the health and education attainment assessment, you can tell that we are closer to one, meaning we are very closer to attaining gender parity when it comes to the indicators under health and education. Under education attainment, which is the second highest in terms of attainment of gender parity. Health and survival ranks the highest for Kenya in terms of where we have the least gender inequality in terms of access to health. Under educational attainment, there are four other sub-indices under education attainment, and it looks at the literacy rates, primary enrollment, secondary and tertiary levels. Again, you can tell the reduction towards attaining gender parity is usually affected by tertiary level and the secondary level, because when you look at the ranking, we have already attained gender parity when it comes to primary level. We have attained, but as you move to secondary and tertiary, then the gender gap starts to widen, therefore reducing the gains made under primary level. Again, just to correlate with the current policy and government spending on education, you can already tell where the money goes, the gap reduces, because we've seen a lot of investments in education, we've seen a lot of investments in health and survival, ensuring maternal health care to women and mothers. And this just shows that where policies are, where the budget allocations are, where the spendings are towards issues that affect both genders, then we can tell that that's where we have the least gap in terms of the existing gender inequalities. Yeah, so this was just to reiterate. Again, given the data, this is a bit outdated, but again, this was just to show for economic participation, you can tell the gap is closing, but in terms of the number of employed female and male, the male slightly again exceed the number of female. When it comes to unemployment, again, the reverse happens, where now the number of unemployed female exceed that of unemployed male. And this, I think, reiterates the performance of Kenya when it comes to that indicator for economic opportunities. That indicator also looks at wage equality for similar work, and there again, we still haven't achieved parity in terms of women and men are rewarded the same for similar work. Yes, again, this is a snapshot of medium, small enterprises. When you look at the licensed side and the unlicensed side, and this is to link also to the work being done by Kenyatta University in their gender audit and presenting this picture, you notice that on that, 9%. When you look at this other side of unlicensed MSMEs, you note again that female are now higher on this end when it comes to the unlicensed MSMEs. And we've seen reports on low uptake of Women Enterprise Fund and other opportunities such as the procurement opportunities set aside for women. So maybe looking at these underlying challenges that then limits them in accessing those funds or makes them hesitate or be reluctant towards venturing into the formal sector can also be addressed in order to then improve the uptake of those funds. This is a snapshot from the PIN Access Household Survey. In terms of progress made in financial inclusion, we can see that there is a trend, an upward trend for both men and women in Kenya in terms of access to financial services. And from that graph, we can also see that as we progress towards 2021, even the gap between the number of women and the number of men who have access to financial services is narrowing. So again, this is a good indicator of the gender parity that exists in terms of access to financial services, which again has been reported as a challenge towards women registering their businesses and getting into the formal sector. So in summary, this chart just shows that trend, and we can still tell in terms of financial inclusion, female are still in the lime green, slightly less than the males in terms of the percentage of inclusion. But as I said, that graph and that space seems to narrow as we move forward. So it's a good indicator as well. So we also have, other than the Global Gender Gap Index, we also have the Women Empowerment Index. And this is published by Kenya National Bureau of Statistics in partnership with the National Treasury and other development partners. This index also measures how women are in Kenya, and it splits these into different categories. Similar to the Global Gender Gap Index at the economic domain, the human resource domain, and the social cultural domain, and then it weights those three categories and gives this again presents that even as we approach research and policy and informing policy, there is need to also understand that the differences in terms of levels of empowerment across rural and urban, in order to avoid again blanketed policies that maybe even make this other group of women worse off. Next slide. Yes, so this is what I was explaining before the slide came up. So the total percentage of women empowered was 29.3%, and this was higher in the urban area. But when this is weighted again against women in rural areas, who are at 22%, then the number reduces to the national average reduces to 29.3%. So the KDHS look at three main domain. Again, here under the economic domain, it mainly looks at for women in union, it looks at paid employment and household land ownership, and they have for women not in union, sorry, only the indicator of paid employment was used in the analysis of that indicator of economic domain. So if a woman had her name on the house or land ownership when she's in union, then that will be recorded as empowered. If not, then it will be recorded as not empowered. And this again was was done across the country. But in 2020, this data only focused on the national level. So this data excludes progress made at the county level. Okay. Yes. So that's under economic domain, those are two main indicators. And for paid employment, they look at whether the annual salary you were in work consistently for 1 year, then they will consider that empowerment, and if not, they will consider that unempowered. And that's how the KNDS goes around this. Under social cultural domain, again, it looks at indicators such as attitudes towards social norms, such as FGM and wife beating. And based on the responses received, then they're able to categorize the response as either empowered or unempowered. And human resource domain, again, they look at education, access to information on related topics such as family planning and HIV/AIDS transmission and prevention. Obviously, this is the part of the KDHS that was taken out of context by everyone and interpreted to mean other things. But the KDHS is quite important even in informing policy. So, for example, other than how they interpreted the data, the KDHS also shows health insurance coverage. Again, this can inform policy in terms of what should the spending in the health sector in terms of insurance look like as we undergo the reforms and our National Health Insurance Fund. How many people have this coverage? What proportion are women and what proportion are men? And even amongst women and men, there is that disproportionate where more people in urban areas tend to have an health insurance cover when compared to people in rural areas, where you can tell that in urban areas we have 39% among females and 41% among males. But when you go to the rural areas, then it declines to 20% among females and 19% among males. And the KDHS also presents where we've managed to make progress, especially in early childhood mortality rates, which has declined. And this can be attributed also to the trends in delivery assistance, where it's increased from in 2014 to 89% in 2022. So therefore, this such surveys are also very important as acting as a source of data in informing policy and also tracking where progress are made. Again, it also provides very key data on early childhood development index, and this is correlated again to when children's development at that young age is not on track, then definitely we're going to spend more in our healthcare, in our education, because most likely in terms of health, they will require more support, more nutrition just to be at par. And in terms of learning and psychosocial well-being, again, it costs a certain cost to keep one student for another extra year in school. So there are all these secondary effects that can also be deduced from the data provided by Kenya National Bureau of Statistics in the KDHS. We'll have a whole review of the KDHS and how it can inform policy. So you can look out for that on our website. This was just a touch on what are some components of the KDHS and what it can mean for policy making. Looking at the regional comparison, in 2021, sadly, when you look at East Africa region, Kenya had closed the least gap across the 4 indicators. But when we look at the 2022 report in the Global Gender Gap Index, at least there is some progress. We are number 3 when you look at the countries in East Africa. This is a summary of how Kenya fares against the global average in the past 4 years. And we can see that mostly Kenya is above the national average, except for political participation, where there is that trend where when the global average was 0.22 in 2022, Kenya's average in political participation was 0.192. So just to interpret, this means that in terms of the gender gap that exists in political empowerment opportunities in Kenya, only 19.2% of the gap has been closed. So meaning there is a long way to go when you compare it to the economic participation, health and education, where we've closed as much as 98% of the gender gap that exists across those sectors. So that is a summary, and that was just to pull us to this political participation component, because that's the only indicator where Kenya is below the global average, as we are quite above the global average across the other three indicators. So this slide reiterates what I have just said to explain that a lot needs to be done to improve performance in economic and political participation. Again, the Global Gender Gap Index states that it will take 137 years for Kenya to close the existing gender gaps. I don't think I want to wait 137 years, and that's why we are all here in this room to decide on how to narrow that gap. Next slide, Justice. Yeah, so this is the slide I was referring to in terms of the performance when you compare the East African countries. And as I mentioned, the Global Gender Gap Index looks at not at the levels of development in the country, but given those levels, what are the gaps in terms of access to those opportunities? So Kenya brags a lot as being the economic leader in East Africa. So it's quite disheartening again to see countries like Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda be ahead of us in terms of closing their gender gap. But this was the trend from 2017 to 2021, where all the East African countries closed more gender gap annually when compared to Kenya. But we see in 2022, this should be 2022, we see that Kenya has quite improved, and we are right behind Rwanda, which has closed 81.1% of the existing gender gaps, followed by Uganda at 77.7%, and then Kenya at 72.9%. This is closely followed by Burundi at 72.4% and Tanzania 71.9%. This slide and this picture is just to show that for us to achieve gender equality, it will take more than policies and laws. We require a lot of political will and goodwill from all the stakeholders to make it happen, because even with countries that have less favorable economic conditions than us, for them to close more gender gap that exists, then it means it just comes with more commitment in ensuring that the available resources are equitably distributed and not necessarily creating new resources to give to the other group. In conclusion, I like to reiterate again, data gap limits efforts, and I use this example in our own study where we had chosen to use the 5 steps in undertaking gender responsive budgeting. But when we got to the 5th step to actually monitor, it was then hard to follow up from the program-based budgeting if this amount was allocated to school fees, bursaries, then how much of it was given to girls and how much was given to boys. So this information is not tracked and reported across all the budget documents. And that made it so hard to assess that component of the impact of that government spending. So it might be that even across these indicators, we've made a lot of investments and a lot of progress, but as long as our data doesn't present that picture, then it makes it hard to actually track. Again, post-COVID-19, there was a lot of recovery and building back strategies. Even the current budget policy statement proposes a lot of building back strategy. The Kenya Kwanza, they had their women agenda, and it also includes incorporation of women in the building back strategy. So this was a lacking element, and we will be able to see what the impact is in the subsequent data. Again, women initiatives are limited to specific sectors, and I mentioned earlier, they say the social sectors are the women's sectors, but during some prior conversations, I had how much a woman in mining requires. And I was told around $1 billion just to start up her business. And when you look at the credit access by women, everyone was praying that miracles happen so she can get access to that 1 billion. So then there is need to further this conversation so that it's a multi-sectoral issue, so that we also make progress. Because if there's one thing the Women Empowerment Index and the Global Gender Gap Index tell us is when there's investment where policies are executed efficiently, then you see results, and we can see how much Kenya was able to close in terms of the gender gaps. To conclude my presentation, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of you when I was making plans for this meeting. And one lady told me, we cannot be celebrating International Women's Day and you're inviting all women at 7 a.m. And in that moment, again, I was reminded of implicit bias. And she said, for most of us, you have to put a lot in order before you can leave the house. So it's really not effective to place a meeting where you have predominantly women participants and panelists starts at 7 a.m. And I note that, and that again reminds me that people most of the times don't choose to be biased, but it happens because of our social norms. But there's need to keep looking at then how can we be explicitly inclusive. Thank you.
Now, we have 40 minutes for this discussion and then 5 minutes, meaning that we only have 8 minutes for everyone of you and have a couple of questions. So this is what I'll do. I will take a minute from each of you. So I have 5 minutes to do an introduction. Then I'll come back and run 2 questions for each of you if you want. So let's start with our main aim today, basically, rather, our title is to embrace equity, Kenya's progress towards gender equality and women's empowerment. And we had in the past conversation a rundown in terms of rather an explanation in terms of what the initiatives, rather the initiative for what works for women's economic empowerment. But it brings me to 3 things. The first is that in terms of rationale, I think it is not debatable anymore that women's economic empowerment is an imperative in Kenya and anywhere. That's not a debate. I think what in recording progress and the audit that we conducted today, that we made a presentation, Professor Mada, Dr. Regina Mada made a presentation, and obviously each of you is going to look at it and tell us different perspectives, but it's very, very clear that in terms of progress, we have some work to still do. And the third question is, I think the one thing that we know is also a fact, is that in driving this conversation, there's a difficult part of this conversation, but in driving this conversation, some of the data that came from DADMI and also Dr. Mada is that we need to embark this conversation so that it doesn't look like talking about making progress for women means regression for men. And I think that's both a social and a political discussion. But the evidence is there because so one of the data pieces that I remember from the data by DADMI is when you talk about financial inclusion, it's a good thing that the Kenyan society is making progress in inclusion for both men and women at the same time. Obviously, giving us the idea that one group's progress need not necessarily come at the expense of the other. But I think that's a debate that's been difficult to, or that's maybe people are being stubborn or have not been convinced. But I think that kind of data is part of the useful one, that our social progress in Kenya shouldn't depend or shouldn't be discussed in terms of meaning somebody else's progress must be held back for one to make it. And then the third part is, I like the fact that you're measuring this progress. You ask yourself for every society, your gender gaps are relative to yourselves based on what you have in your country. So obviously the question of measuring gender gaps will not be, is not vulnerable to the discussion. Okay, I don't use the word vulnerable, what should I say? Will not be held hostage by the view that these are data pieces that measure foreign things. And for someone who works in a think tank, one of the main ideas that when you speak to many people, they start to say things such as, that's an idea that came from Finland. See, the Finnish are not people, right? Or that's an idea that came from this place. So I think human progress is important regardless of where you were. And here we are measuring our progress, and if we can achieve this for both of us, I think society is all better. So it's not just a question of political eyeballing each other. It's simply to say Kenya's society loses quite substantially, even on the economic side, by failing to provide and understand what works for women's economic empowerment and in all those other sectors. So with that background, I'd like us to start by a question to should I start with Winfred? I think Darmi and all our presentations here, and Dr. Wata also showed us that we still have a question about data to measure and also to discuss the questions of these gaps and women's economic empowerment from data and empirics as opposed to feelings, however strong feelings may be. And yet we know that the National Bureau of Statistics and the data in general, we are constrained by the data that is current. It's very specific and measures the questions that allow us to make these policy discussions so important. So obviously, as a country, so my view for Winfred is, in what ways do you think women's economic empowerment could be linked to government's policy priorities, especially taking into account the place of youth as well? Would you like to take this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Winfred. I work for Africa Youth Trust. First of all, I'll want to unpack that question. I'll first of all handle the women economic empowerment. Why women economic empowerment? And when you're talking about women economic empowerment, number one, we are looking at issues of policies, which is being driven by data. And I'm happy that we have institutions, research institutions that are really doing that job very well. That is Kenyatta University and UON. And then we also now have the intervention that is supposed to be put in place, because once we have the data, it is this data that is going to drive the interventions that are supposed to empower women. So when you're talking about the intervention, that is where now the CSOs are coming in to do advocacy on areas that empower women. And when you're talking about the intervention, we're looking at gender responsive public services. We're looking at child care centers. We're looking at safe households. Majority of women, when you look at the data that it's all over the place, is that out of 5 women, you'll find that 3 women have undergone sexual and gender-based violence. So we need to have safe houses that really accommodate women that have experienced sexual and gender-based violence. And then we're also looking at issues of modern market, which support women in economy. Then the other part that we need to look at when we're talking about women economic empowerment is resource allocation. And that's where now the issue of gender responsive budgeting comes in. So why women economic empowerment? When we talk about women economic empowerment, it means that most of women will be benefiting from development process. At the same time, women will equally participate in the existing markets. Women will have access to productive resources, and then they'll also have decent work, because we've seen majority of these women are working in the informal sector. When you look at the percentage of women working in the formal and informal sector, majority of them are in the informal sector. And some of the policies are not very much favorable to these women. So when you talk about policies, it means that more women who are working in the informal sector will be supported, and then they'll also have control over their lifestyle and body. And also there will be also meaningful participation of women in decision-making process. So when I narrow it down to youth agenda, there are interventions that the government has put in place to ensure that young women also benefit. So I'll talk about affirmative action fund. And when I'm talking about affirmative action fund, we have Women Enterprise Fund, we have WESO Fund, we have Youth Enterprise Development Fund, we have National Government Affirmative Fund. So these are some of the interventions that will really work well for young women, but there are also challenges because when we want to look at data, when we want to access the number of young women who have access to affirmative action fund, I don't think we have that data. Okay, I don't think if we have that data. And then there are also some challenges that these young women are facing. Number one, they don't have information that these interventions exist. Because there was a research that was done by UON on access to affirmative action fund. You'll find that number one, they don't have information that such funds exist. Number two, there is a lot of political interference because you find that the pattern for this affirmative action fund is being managed by a member of parliament, and you'll be given those such funds based on, did you really support them when they were doing their campaign? Then the other thing that we need to look at is access to government procurement opportunities, whereby that is 30% that is supposed to cater for the youth, cater for youth, women, and persons with disability. Still, there's a lot of challenges because we still don't have data to see how many young women are able to access the AGPO. Then there is also an intervention that the government came up with, Kazi kwa Vijana. This Kazi kwa Vijana, it had a lot of challenges, and from the research that was done, you'll find that young women were experiencing sexual harassment during the recruitment process. The environment was never conducive for them because when you look at expectant women, because the majority of work that is being done for Kazi kwa Vijana, it's sweeping, cleaning the environment. And when you ask yourself, is that environment conducive for a woman who is expectant? Because I've never seen, maybe there's no criteria on how they can even support women who are expectant. Then there is also Linda Mama that normally support women in terms of their maternity cover. And then we also have got public participation, which is a platform that is being used by citizens to voice out the issues that are really affecting them in terms of development and also to hold government accountable. Then we also have got policies. Policies is still coming in, which is being driven by data. And when I'm talking about policy, I'm looking at policy on Employment Act. When you look at that policy, you find that it's not gender sensitive, especially for women who are especially for women who are experiencing sexual harassment, because there is no proper criteria whereby if a woman has experienced sexual harassment, what are some of the strategies that it has been put in place to address that issue? Then the other policy that I want to...
You need to conclude now so we can give a chance to the other group.
Okay, sorry for that. So if we have policies that are really gender responsive, then it means that we are really going to accommodate. We are going to accommodate everyone, and especially during formulation of these policies, we have to ensure that young women are being involved so that they can also voice out their issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Rosemary, I think in all the presentations that we've had today and following from the speaker, one of the things we're hearing is it is not possible to make progressive policy. It's not possible to formulate policy without having facts. The facts obviously come from, it could be qualitative, but also knowing the numbers is important as well. So in some places, the facts or the data is missing absolutely. When it exists, it is not disaggregated to allow us to extract meaningful insights from it. So there's a lack of disaggregated data or the absence of facts altogether is a challenge in tracking our progress. I think how can it be improved?
Thank you very much. I'm Rosemary from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, and KNBS is a government agency that is mandated to provide official statistics for planning. Lack of disaggregated data and how it can be improved. We know that data is an expensive venture to be able to collect and bring together. And we know that it's a very important center to guide policymakers and researchers at large. What KNBS has done in the last, I think it was in 2018, we were able to come up with a gender statistics sector plan. And within this plan, we were able to assess the gaps in terms of gender statistics. And the gender statistics plan, which is within the Kenya Strategy for Development Statistics, is supposed to ensure that in whatever activities that we do as KNBS, we mainstream and ensure that our data is gender disaggregated to the lowest point. So one of the ways to improve the availability of gender disaggregated data, of course, is the full implementation of the gender statistics plan, which is within the Kenya Strategy for Development of Statistics. The other one is resource mobilization. All of us know that our KNBS depends on the exchequer for the budget, for the running of the activities. But of course, we also have a leeway to ensure that we mobilize resources outside the government. And this one we've been doing, trying to ensure that we work with development partners to ensure that we have data that is available, not only for gender, not only gender statistics, but also all kinds of statistics. And that is what we do. Like the current KTHS, that of course we have released the key indicator report sometime early this year. We are launching the full report the end of May. We were able to reach out to development partners, and we will have rich data that is gender segregated on KTHS. The other one is to mainstream gender data in the existing surveys that we have. Recently, we have been working with KU, the KU we have, and we had a module in the Kenya Continuous Household Survey on providing indicators for the women economic empowerment. So we have ongoing surveys as KNBS, and so that we don't have to really create resources for general indicators, we mainstream them in the surveys that are going on. We have the Statistics Act that was revised in 2019. Currently, we are developing regulations to implement that particular act. And we are working together with UN Women and other stakeholders to ensure that the regulations are gender responsive. And this way, because we are meant to coordinate production of statistics in the national statistical system, this act we will ensure that these regulations are going to be used to ensure that the data that is being produced in the MTAs, that is the ministries, departments, and agencies, are gender responsive. So we have a very keen eye to ensure that this regulation will ensure the MTAs are producing data that is gender responsive. The other aspect that we are exploring to ensure that we have gender disaggregated data as KNBS is to explore the use of alternative data sources. I don't know whether I still have time. We developed a criteria recently based on there is something that we call KESCA, Kenya Statistical Assurance Quality Framework. And within that, we have a criteria for modifying data that is produced by non-state actors for visual reporting. So we are casting out our net. We are checking what the non-state actors are producing and seeing how we can qualify it for official reporting so that we can increase the amount of data for official reporting. And we have a lot of non-state actors in the area of gender. The other one is that KNBS has signed an inclusive data charter, whereby, in the spirit of leaving no one behind, we are committing ourselves that we produce data that is gender responsive, that is responsive also to issues of disability, and to ensure that even the minorities are included in our gender, in our data collection activities.
Thank you. Let me come to Professor Ngari. So in addition to the fact that, I mean, there's not zero data, of course, everybody would like some more. And we've had from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, I think the major constraint which you did not mention is it might be essential for all of us to think about this issue on a day-to-day basis to ask ourselves, in addition to the gender gaps that exist, part of the reason the gender gap exists, or part of the reason we wouldn't know how to respond to it is that there's a gap in the funding to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics in terms of resources to it, because you haven't said you lack the capacity, or you say, right? If the money was available from national funding, obviously the data that we need to make all that, to connect those threads would be available. But then we come to an academy, Professor Ngari. How do we use the studies under the we have to promote the ideas or the findings on Kenya?
Okay, thank you so much, Kwame. Good morning, everyone. May I first of all start by saying where we started in the generation of data from the KUWEE we have. We did not just do research for the sake of it. Actually, all the ongoing programs that we have been looking into are programs that have either been implemented by the government or the non-state actors. And these are programs that have been going on. And the idea was to do an evaluation on what works. The major achievement in this, you could be cooking pasta throughout for years and years, and you are feeding your children, and the children are still getting malnutrited. And therefore, you don't know why your children are not getting, healthy, yet you are giving them enough food. So the KU we have is literally looking into that, what works, evaluating this program, and the university has the capacity to use all methodologies of evaluation and to at least make informed decisions. If you look at part of the programs, like what Dr. Mwanda presented earlier, there are some areas where, for example, let me speak something like manufacturing. The government has given facilities for women to engage in manufacturing. The government may continue giving money or, even writing reports that women are in manufacturing, yet you don't know the nitty-gritty of what is happening. So we are getting right into the middle of it. If this has been happening for a year, 1 year, 2, then where are the results? You have seen very funny statistics here that women are getting educated, which the government has done a lot in heralding girls' education, all the way from primary school. But when you go to the boardrooms, then you don't find these women. So there is a discrepancy. And our role as researchers, as we have, is to find out then if women are getting educated at very high levels. By the way, when you look at the universities, the ratio of girls and boys who graduate is almost at the same level. It's at 5. So the question we ask is, after 3, 4, 5 years, as the radar, changes, where is the gap coming in? That's why we are doing an evaluation. And one of the key findings that we have found is that mentorship is very crucial. Mentoring, not just at the level of high school, because a lot of people concentrate on mentoring at high school, but mentorship even at new career development. Women get into careers and they are lost within the way. Again, I think earlier you mentioned that there is a lot of hula in the country, boys, child, everybody's crying, women have become so empowered, and so the boys, we have neglected the boys. I think that is a talk, but the data is proving different. Even when Jatani says that the role of men, men are going down and all this, we need to look at literally where exactly is the gap and what is creating the gap. And that's the role of the we have. In all the researches, like I would mention the last one I want to say, there is a creche program in Tharaka County set by the Tharaka County government. And the government says, we have put up a creche in the middle of the Chuka market, and therefore this can relieve women of childcare work and go and do their economic business. The government, the county government, may continue pampering that creche program. But has anybody put up the data to show literally, is there a correlation between relieving women of childcare and economic empowerment? This is what the hub is trying to do. Get into assessment of these programs, look at exactly what is happening, where there is progress, we are saying, and I think Regina pointed out that there is an increase there. There is even in corporate governance,
in all the projects that we are doing, that is exactly what we are trying to find out, to give informed decisions on where we are going wrong, so that we can change the ingredients of pasta, maybe increase pasta, maybe reduce the salt, maybe increase the water. Exactly, that's what the hub is trying to do with that metaphor. Thank you.
Right, thanks, a brilliant metaphor. I think yes, research often should not be an end in itself. So as Professor Ngalo has reminded us, the point to ask ourselves is, if we've been on this treadmill or this feeding program for children and the malnutrition persists, we need to ask ourselves why. And I think the most important thing about this is evaluative research. The evaluative research is essential because policy priorities sometimes can come with solutions looking for problems. And politicians are sometimes good at doing that. They have a preference for certain policy posture, which is imposed, and everybody's aligned and committed to it. So nobody knows whether or not it's working and achieving its goals unless some evaluative research is taken. The one area in which I think the evidence is fairly transparent is in the question of political representation. I don't think that is one area in which there's doubt that the gap is large, and that it is not possible that it will close on its own. When Dan we mentioned the 137 years that we all have to wait. Good luck to those who want to wait. I think we should be a little bit more impatient and say, look, we have to close this and try and close it as quickly as it's possible. So I come now to Betty of the National Gender and Equality Commission, right? So you can see that mainstreaming gender in public sector and in politics, economic opportunities seem to be suboptimal. So first, what's your view about what are the causes, but how do you think this gap will be closed? Because it's our biggest gap actually, the political side.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kwame. First of all, I just want to say I'm Betty Malamba from the National Gender Equality, and I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of our chairperson, Dr. Joyce Wikali, in the room. And then we also have our AD, that is Assistant Director Programs, Madam Winnie Wambua. Now, to answer your question, first of all, I'd like to say that the National Gender and Equality Commission is a constitutional commission established by the National Gender and Equality Commission Act 15 of 2011, pursuant to Article 59, 4 and 5 of the Constitution of Kenya. Now, the commission has a mandate to promote gender equality and non-discrimination across the country. And I just want to say that our focus group is, that is the special interest groups. We have the group that we focus on, that is women, we have children, we have persons with disability, we have minority, marginalized and older persons of the society, the older members of the society. Now, to answer your question, Mr. Kwame, on how we can actually, how we can ensure mainstreaming of gender in our public sector. I want to say that report that we do this through performance contracting, where ministries, department, and agency are required to report. They submit these reports on a quarterly basis to the National Gender and Equality Commission and the State Department for Gender and Affirmative Action. Members seated here, I'd like to remind us that as a commission, we do not implement, we are not implementers, rather we are an oversight body. Now, currently, a majority of MDAs have developed gender mainstreaming policies and GBV policies, including the sexual harassment policies in place. And we find that this has increased the level of compliance in MDS. However, we need to note that currently counties are not reporting. We need to have counties also to report on matters with the gender mainstreaming. When we look at the previous rounds of the previous cycles, counties were reporting, but when we look at the 19th cycle, counties are not reporting. So that is one way we need to push for the inclusivity of counties to do the same. Now, one of the major challenges that the Commission faces in matters to do with gender mainstreaming, there is lack of enforcement mechanism for compliance with principles of equality and inclusion. For example, if an agency sends or submits a report that is not compliant, other than the Commission providing them with advisory, there's nothing much more we can do to that. So there's lack of enforcement. There are no penalties for lack of compliance in the public sector. Now, in many jurisdictions, government agencies access their budget and grants upon submission of clearance certificate or certificate of clearance from equal opportunity oversight bodies that include the equivalent to MGC, stating that the agency has put adequate measures in their planning and budgeting tools to address inequalities and inclusion. Now, members who are seated here, if we look at, I'll give an example of Uganda. Before an agency receives their budget, they have to ensure they meet the threshold for two-thirds gender for not more than two-thirds gender principle and also inclusion. In Kenya, that is not the case. So long as you get a clearance certificate, you are funded as an agency. So what we propose an amendment of the Public Finance Management Act of 2012. There is need to include that compulsory that before an agency gets funding from the National Treasury, they need to be compliant with the principles and the inclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you tie everything to money, people are bound to act right? Yeah, that's a good incentive structure. And we come to Magdalene. And so Magdalene works at the Collaboration Center for Gender Development, right? So you've had everybody. I asked you last for a reason, but you had everybody. And what I'd like to ask you is, what do you think should be the priorities? One of the things that we at the Institute of Economic Research, my apologies for imposing our views here, and especially the views of a man. One of the things we learn at the Institute of Economic Affairs is that government and those who sit in the public sector do not lack a wish list that they receive from us on a regular basis. But at the same time, any student of economics will tell you that there's a scarcity of resources everywhere at all times. So that means that there's a very big advantage to being able to prioritize what gives the best outcomes for the least money. So how do we send money to chase the objectives that we want? Because obviously most of these things are meant over time. So I'd like you, Magdalene, to tell us what do you think are the priorities for we in Kenya, and how do you justify them?
Okay, that's a very broad area, but I'll try to use my co-panelist examples we've given. I think Kenya, we have very good policies and strategies in place. I'll be giving a reference to the released National WE Strategy 2020 to 2025, because the policy is not yet out, so I can't give reference to that. When we talk about priority number one is financing, and glad you spoke to that. When you talk about financing, I think the government, as Wilfred mentioned earlier, the government has very good affirmative actions, which are supposed to finance women economically. But when you look at, I'll give an example of ACPO. ACPO is required to give 30% to women. But when you look at the requirement ACPO makes
for you to get to procure government services. It's not convenient, or rather our Njiku cannot afford to get all that requirements to be able to get AGPO. When you look at Women Economic Fund as well as the youth fund, as well my colleague has mentioned, yes, it's meant to be for women, but what's the priority? Why is there so much political influence around it that our Njiku, by the time our Njiku gets to get the funds, it's either he or she has already given up, or because women are more practical. Unless we have money on our hands, we cannot really implement what we have to do. Unlike the other gender, for them they plan to get the money and then implement. For women, we need to get the money, but we have very good existing financial affirmative funds. How can the government make it easy for us to get the money? That's a challenge I'm giving all of us in this room. Priority area one is finances. How can we reduce that? We've had presentations around data, but one thing that was lacking on our presentation is the existing strategies, models, policies we have. How can we ensure the challenges around access to finance, especially for women, are also captured in the data we have? The second one I'd like to go security, especially for women who are trying to empower themselves economically. And these are give reference. I'm sure we've all seen the documentary on the tea plantation. What's the priority of women? Do we have security at our workplaces? As Betty mentioned, for any organization to be registered, to be given funds, you have to ensure there's a two-third gender. But what does that mean? Is it just we have to have women in the organization? Do we have policies that protect these women in this organization? So that should also fall under priority as women, because women, we cannot work where we are not secure. We cannot work where our self-esteem, our self-worth is being reduced, where we do not feel safe. We cannot work in an environment that we do not know how our tomorrow will look like. And for that, I think there's so many conversations that's going on thanks to the documentary that came out. Education, and I'm glad KUWEE is here, and they've given good presentation, especially on the level of education for women. Once they come out of the education system, we've seen, I think from the presentation Danny presented earlier, we see more women in informal work than formal work. What does it mean? Yesterday, there was a Gazette article showing Mitumba is going up from 28 shillings to 108 shillings. When you look at informal work, women are the one leading in informal work. Is it a priority for our government? Is it a priority as seated here to look at what can we do, especially for women leaving education, education institution, looking at after the education, what happens? And we have, and you have amazing opportunities for women, but for those women who cannot get those opportunities, what can be done? So priority goes to education, but not education on institutional level, but after they leave the education institution. Health is also a priority, and when I talk about health, mention a bit of unpaid care and domestic work. When you look at health in regards to reproductive health, the burden falls under women. It's our responsibility because it's culturally and structurally, it's a structural and cultural norm for us women when it comes to reproductive work. All of it falls under us, and the KDHS and also the presentation given by Damani shows at least women we are getting healthcare services, but to what extent? When we're talking about women, one-ship women, and for this I'll give reference for women in ASAL areas, they don't even know what a healthcare service is. When the 24-hour mass exodus was being done in the counties in ASAL region, we saw women giving birth by the roadside. Does it mean there are less women than us? How can you empower that woman to know this woman? The government has, is this woman? What, Mama? Leader Mama. The government has Leader Mama. Does this information go to these grassroots women? And the last priority area I would like to give, especially when it comes to women economic empowerment, is public participation of women. Are women invited in the table? When the government is coming, the CIDP, I think, was just finalized. Well, I'm sure most of us were part of the CIDP. Did we see Wanjiku's on the table? From the end where I represented, I didn't see Wanjiku's. So that now brings the question, are women aware of our roles? Are women aware we are the ones who have to take up, who have to be vocal about our voices? We have to be included in the discussion. We need to go sit in this meeting. We need to go sit in this budget allocation meeting and speak up for our own good. We need to ensure each and every priority of ours is included in the budget allocation. We don't have to wait for the budget to be out for us to go and now start complaining, oh, we want to do this, but we don't have this level 5 hospital, but they don't have treatment, they don't have a maternal facility for women. How can we ensure women, especially grassroots women, and I'm glad most of us here are coming from grassroots organization, education institution. What strategies, models can we come up with to ensure all women all over are aware of existing opportunities we have? So thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. One of the things that we, again, coming at the Institute of Economic Affairs, this time I speak as a partner, not as a man, one of the things we've learned through over time is to tell people to make the distinction between the world as it is and how we'd like it to be. And you can be very cynical if you believe the world should be just as it is. But how we'd like it to be is what we call good policy. And I hear many Kenyans say that government has good policies, but it doesn't implement them. I don't know, I think that's too generous. Because if you have a policy in the manner which says you will protect all mothers, regardless of where they are, and mothers are giving birth to the roadside, that can't be a good policy. If you have a good policy and kids are going to school and there's no teacher, that can't be a good policy. So my view is, and I say this with the utmost respect, we have to be less flowery with giving government a lot of credit and jobs using a 200-page document. Because if implementation is a problem, policy is not anything but what is implemented. Policy is what government spends money and time on. What takes my attention is my job. That's where your KPIs should lie. So let me push back ladies. Stop believing too much the government has good policy and yet it's failing you. If we have those gaps that Dr. showed us, that it will take us 137 years to close those gaps, and we all agree that that is going to be it, then that can't be a good policy environment. So let's start with the idea, how do we make this a complete policy environment? Now, having said that cynical thing, I'm glad that all of you are very, very. I'll come back to you to claim your final 5 minutes. But I was conscious that I kept this, so I knew that Dr. Mikali Mukinda, who's the chair of the National Gender and Equality Commission, was here. So we're grateful that you're here. And I was thinking that in starting the open conversation, if you have some comments and an opportunity to introduce yourself, this is perhaps the time to start with. Should you like to do that? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Sorry, I came a bit late. I must say I was late. But that being the case, this is something that I treasure as an individual, because the issue of data cannot be gainsaid. And we are not going to get data if we are not dealing with institutions such as the Institute of Economic Affairs, if we are not dealing with Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, if we are not dealing with academicians. That is where we get our data. But I now am very happy that we have alternative sources of data. And we need to clean that so that we are sure what we get is correct. But what is it that I want to tell you this morning? I want to give you some hope. Where do the policies come from? From the executive. And that is when we talk of our cabinet secretaries, when we talk of our cabinet, the replica of our cabinet secretaries at the county level. That is where we get our policies. And it is from those policies that the legislators, you can call them at the county level, the MCAs, when they go to the county assembly, and our National Assembly and Senate. That is where they make the legislation from. From that, then we go to the regulations that somebody talked about. What is it that is missing? Why is the government still not to be implementing? It's because we have not gone to the next step of the guidelines and the standards that will help us in implementation. And that is a fight we have been dealing with as NGEC. Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you is to give you hope when it comes to closing the gender gap, particularly in the political arena. A lot has been happening, and I said I'll recap that. One, the current government, and this is something we have been missing, has given us the political will. And we have seen this in the presidential memorandum to Parliament, which was dished out on, I think it was December, if I'm not wrong, and December 2022, to be precise, on the 9th. Now, there has been a lot of debate about that. And that debate has woken us up as NGEC to take our position. Now that we have the political will, we have taken our position and said, for once, we are going to get this political participation right. So we moved on. We realized His Excellency the President had come up with an advisor on women affairs, that is Harriet Chigai, and we called on her. And we held an interactive session with the newsmen from all media houses. And that was not enough, because with all due respect to our media people, if you don't grease their palm, very little will come out to be known. And therefore we moved on. I must say we held that on the 27th of January. After noticing that the impact was not big enough, we went to Citizen TV, and we held a 2-hour discussion for all Kenyans to know what has happened. And what we have been saying is, when it comes to our National Assembly, with 350 positions that are supposed to be there, the 1/3 should be 117 persons. And for that reason, women. And since at the moment, we have 47 from the counties, and we have elected 28 women, and we have some 6 nominees, we already have 81. And therefore, the deficit that we are asking for is 36 persons. If today we had a miracle and got 36 persons, then our National Assembly would be compliant. For the Senate, the story is different. All we need is 2. We have a deficit of 2. And this is coming from the mathematics of having Senate, that's 69 members. And of these, the 1/3 should be 23. We already have special seats, 16 women, and we have 5 nominees, making it 21. And therefore, the deficit is 2 persons. And we have made this known to parliamentarians and to our Senate. How did we do this as National Gender and Equality Commission? We have had dialogues with them. The first dialogue, we held that on 28th, I think 28th February this year. And the next one for the senators was yesterday. And we are impressed by the fact that when we give them the mathematics, they begin to ask, then what is the formula? And we have gotten a consultant to take them through the formula. And the formula is not a secret. I'll tell you that you can also share on our behalf. We have come up with a book on the journey of 2/3, and this is on our website. I have a copy of that booklet. It is on our website. We have together all the 9 bills, what we have done in court. And I know for most of you, you know what has gone on in that journey. And we have told them the pitfalls and what is happening in other countries. And we are telling them, now without this, you have a choice. And as of yesterday, they were saying rotating the various constituencies may be the best. I don't know which one they will pick, but they are very keen. JLAC is very keen. You can see them listening and taking notes and asking questions and calling back. So I want to give you hope, because what we were missing was the political goodwill. Next, we lacked commitment. I'm beginning to see that commitment. So in my lifetime, and I'll be leaving NGC next year, so I'm looking for a job. I'm looking at Professor, they can give me a job. You know, you have to talk for yourself when you get the microphone. Now, before I leave, I have been assured that the 2/3 gender principle will have been legislated in this country. We shall not go as per Article 27, as most of you would expect. We shall just respect it and go to Article 100. So we take care of a bigger group, that is the women, the youth, PWDs, ethnic minorities, and other minorities. That way we'll be inclusive. We don't want to leave anyone behind. And I think we are going to get there. So take heart for those who are young in this room. It is going to happen in your lifetime, not in 137 years. No, it's going to happen sooner than that. Thank you and God bless.
Any other questions or interventions for, okay, let me see.
Good morning once again, everyone. A chance to reintroduce myself, Moses Okelo from Center for Rights, Education and Awareness. I'm equally concerned with the issue of data. Data provides us with evidence on what we really feel is working and what's not working, and definitely what we really need to do to drive changes that we need to see in our societies. Now, reference I'm making to one of the presentations that was made by KU, not KU, Institute of Economic Affairs, where the data that was projected before us was from 2014. And looking at data from 2014 and we are in 2023, then at the same time, I'm looking at data that is on delivery of assistance, where in 2014, we had 66% the support service delivered. But later in 2022, we have those services moving to 89%. But when we look at the data that was presented in 2014, it means that if we don't do much in collection of this data and analyzing to inform future decisions, definitely we are not going to get the results that we are looking for. Kenyatta University, in their presentation, failed to touch on the percentage of women that are seeking support services under economic empowerment or access to economic opportunities for women. For what we saw, that was lacking. And the question would be, could it be that the institutions that are mandated to implement economic interventions are not doing enough to bring on board research institutions like KU, we have, and the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics to be able to collect these data, present them, or use them to draft key policy frameworks that would inform subsequent decisions in terms of interventions to be implemented. Then finally, I'm going to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. We talk of lack of resources to be able to collect this data. And from what we've seen, some of the statistics are outdated. And an outdated data may present false information or information that would guide our decision making. So what is it that we can do to strengthen collaboration between institutions, that is civil society organizations, research institutions, and also the national government, such that instead of us going to or talking about mobilizing resources to connect these resources, we work with our partners that are already in this space to be able to participate in data collection, research, development of policy frameworks, and advocating for the domestication of such policies. Thank you so much.
3 questions, one for Kenyatta University, for Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, and I think for Dartmouth, right? Other questions online? Okay. Can I read them from here? Let me see. No, I can't see. I can't see the questions. Oh, they do. Okay. Let me see. Oh, yes, Hannah. Hannah hands. Okay, Hannah, please ask your question. Go ahead. There?
You can proceed.
Let's get somebody else to ask another question to come up.
My name is Anita from the Eastern African Child Rights Network. And my question stems from a presentation that was made in the morning that said, is there a relationship between women doing care work and would removing that care work from women make them more economically empowered? And one of the presenters also mentioned that mostly women do reproductive work. So I'm just trying to look at the implications since I'm from the Child Rights Network, so on child rights. What implications does that have on children when women don't do care work? And then we also saw that as women improve, like when they have higher education, when they're economically empowered, they tend to be single. Like, do they sacrifice, I'll use this word loosely, do they sacrifice family for career development? And I'm just trying to see whether we can cure that in other ways. For example, we make it easier for women to engage in both their career and care work, like through policies, good policies, as you put it, like that are implemented. Like we see some women are afraid of getting pregnant because they may lose their jobs. Because some jobs don't give leave, maternal leave, even though it's in the Constitution, in the Employment Act, sorry. And so just to make conducive working environment for women so that they don't lose out on the care work, because I'm thinking this care work will need money. So which means the more economically empowered, the more you're able to afford someone else to take care of your family for you. So I'm just thinking also putting women, giving them the same salary or the same work done as men, because we know that some women earn less. Sometimes we hear that it's because they are paying for less when they're doing these interviews. So I'm just trying to see curing this through other ways, like it's a means to an end. I don't know if that's clear.
Are they read your life?
Yeah.
Ms. Hannah, maybe?
She seems to have left
Oh,
the chat, yeah.
Thank you, Christy from the Open Institute. More of comments. Number one, we cannot talk about women empowerment and leave the place of technology. When we are talking about access to finances, a lot of this is now online. When we are talking about furthering education, there are online platforms where women can talk about how we can further their education and get empowered. So we need to look into that as well. Then there is a concern about
segmented resources for women. Uwezo Fund, Hustler Fund, Women Empowerment Funds. What is the challenge with having this segmentation? Are we giving too little to very many people? Then we talked about having 1 billion. Could it be possible if we pulled this together, then we are able to access more funds? So what is the challenge with the segmentation? Then just out of curiosity, and then this presentation talking about unlicensed businesses or the SMEs, unlicensed women are leading. I thought it's the men who are risk takers. What is the challenge with this? What is the behind story? Because it looks like there's something interesting. And how can we use this behind story to empower women so that they have their businesses right? Thank you.
Any other question?
Good morning again. I'm Valeria Keka from the University of Development. I would like either or you to kind of identify into participation, because as much as we and out and said it very, do these women have training on a bunch of documents that they're actually sitting down to listen on? Because you cannot be in a room and 300 documents, each document is read, and someone doesn't even know where she's supposed to chime in or how this is affecting her. Because as much as we're saying you are the voice, what exactly am I voicing for? I don't know if my question is clear. However, it's based on the budget documents. Is there training for this women to actually understand them better? Thank you.
No. Start. Oh, Ezekiel has. Oh,
Okay, is there a question?
no, he hasn't posted.
He has his hand up.
Yeah.
Ezekiel, could you ask your question, please? Or better still, just type it so that we can read it out.
Okay, this is Ezekiel. I hope you can hear me.
All right.
Or do you want me to type?
No, just go ahead. Please ask.
Oh, thank you. I'm Ezekiel Gure. I work with UNFPA. First of all, to thank the Hub for organizing this meeting, and also for the good work that you are doing together with the other research institutions, academia, and also the CSOs. Mine is a comment and also a request not only to the panelists, but also to all of us as the CSOs, the researchers, and the academic institutions. One is the issue of data gap that has been highlighted by all the presenters. And one of the area is that in most cases, we find that if you are not in the table or when the surveys are being designed or other data collection tools, we always miss out on the gender disaggregation and also in the area of data analysis that will be able to help us to see how much information or how much progress we have been able to make in the gender aspects in the field. And therefore, my plea to all of us is that one is to ensure that all the time we are on the table when all these studies are being designed, so that we can be able to provide this information on these gaps, and that therefore we be able to collect data. And thereafter, we have seen in many cases, like we have the census, we have the DHS, and other studies that have been done, like Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey and other surveys that have been conducted. But once the data has been, or the main report has been produced, we rarely go back into the data to do further analysis. And this is another call for us as the academia, the institutions that's dealing with informing policies of we go back into the data, dig out, do further analysis so that we can be able to produce that information that will be used for formulation of policies and also in programming. And in the world now, people are shifting, or countries and institutions are shifting from the surveys and censuses to administrative data. A good example is data on GBV. And in Kenya, in many cases, like also in FGM, we always wait for the DHS. But we also need to look at what other systems that you can be able to support that can be able to give us annual incidences from the administrative data. You look at, for GBV, we have various hotlines that are collecting data on GBV. But can we have a consolidated or a coordinated way of collecting that data so that we can have a tally that can present the whole country? And if you do this, then we'll be able to have accurate or data that you can be able to use for programming and policy formulation within the country. And therefore, the call is how can we help the government to be able to have this coordination and of data from the census and also from the administrative data that can be able to help us and do that further analysis to be able to inform the systems that we have, and especially the policies. Lastly, is to look at the collaboration between the data producers and data users, and especially the academia, the research institutions, and also the government. In many cases, we don't have that forum that we bring together the data users to inform the data producers of the need of the data that we have in our programming. And I think this is another step that if this is done in collaboration with the government and other institutions, then we can be able to fill the gaps that are being seen within our data systems. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Now, I noticed that you were supposed to have the 10. It's kind that you're ready. Do you have a question as well? Yes. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Trace Otieno. Just on the data, because we realized most of the discussion we are having or any decisions that we are to make as an institution or a government entity, we must rely on the data. To gain KNBS, because majorly that's where we go to when we need any data to make economic decisions in this country. If financing is the issue, have you considered collaborating with other institutions that purely do research and they update their data from time to time? Because we realize with some of the presentations that were earlier done, the data were way outdated. And as he had mentioned, that's risky for any development issues that are to be undertaken, even for the economic aspect of it and the financial aspect of it. We realize every decision that we make, we go back to the inflation issues. And if our data are not correct, we are not able to capture all these issues correctly. Because then again, it means we don't, clearly we all know the dollars increased and the Kenya shilling is weakening. If this data is not updated on a timely manner, we might miss on that. And we might not move as a country because we are relying on information that is not reliable. So to the KNBS, I would really appreciate if you could bring this and consider also collaborating with other bodies that purely do research and finance of more openly, even through grants with other nations like World Bank, because we have such institutions in countries that we don't have the gap that we have right now. And then we encourage our people to be technology savvy, because some of this data, if we don't embrace technology, we might not be able to access this information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We were supposed to finish at 10. It's already 10:30 on my beat. So what I'm doing is I'm just asking the panelists. I'll cycle through the panelists, just go one way, and of course finish with Professor Gary. 3 minutes each. You take any of the questions or any of the comments that you'd like to respond to. We can have a conversation, proceed down to this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think the concern in this room is about data. I want to address the issue of the generation of more recent data and more relevant data. KNBS, like I said in my response earlier, is now looking out, not just confining ourselves to our traditional surveys that we wait for 5 years to generate data, and we are moving out to check what even and state actors are producing, and we are using a criteria to qualify citizen-generated data, so that once we qualify the data, we are using it for official reporting. And one of the data sets is by PMA. I don't remember the complete description. Performance? Yes, so we realized that they produce their data annually. And recently, we went through their data sets, I think it's about 2 months ago, and we realized that instead of waiting for DHS for 5 years, and I think for us, we have waited for 7 years, we can use their data. And currently, actually, it's on our website. So we are actually kind of opening up and seeing other avenues of ensuring that we provide data for the user. Apart from the data on the demographics, that is from the PMA, we also have data on education by TOWEZA. And we were able to qualify that data based on the criteria that we developed. I think there was something raised again by UNFPA in terms of the conversation when we are developing our questionnaires and other data collection instruments. Of course, whenever we are carrying out very big surveys and censuses, like the 2019 census, we normally call upon many stakeholders to come to the table, and even the KTHS. What I know is that KNPS is an open organization, and whenever any institution wants or requires some kind of data, and they have the capacity to be able to support, KNPS always reaches out, and we can be able to provide technical support. We may not provide the financial, but we can provide the technical support and also the framework. For example, we are in charge of the sampling frame for both the households and for the businesses. We can provide that, and we can provide also the technical support, because we have a very large number of trained statisticians, and we can support data collection initiatives. And we have many organizations that have approached us, and we have worked with them. And our door is always open to support. I don't know whether I've answered all the questions, but those are the ones I was able to capture. Then the other issue is embracing of technology. We are working towards harnessing the big data. Currently, we have a data science lab that was established 2 months ago. This means that we are not going to be confined to traditional data sources. What we are trying to do is to develop our capacity to be able to use the big data. The big data is, for example, instead of collecting data for CPI, that is a consumer price index, from the markets, we are thinking in future, we can be able to use the big data from the data that is collected by supermarkets and be able to analyze that. And that way, harnessing on technology, we are able to deal with the issue of a shortage of resources in terms of financial resources. So basically, I think that is what KNPS is doing in that direction. And we are open to collaboration. Currently, we are collaborating with KU for the Women Economic Empowerment Index development. We have collaborated also with universities in terms of doing further analysis of the data. And we have an open portal for access by public to microdata that can be used for further analysis. So maybe sometimes the public doesn't know, but KNPS is open to provide the statistical service. Thank you.
I agree and concur with many speakers who have talked about data. Now, in regards to coordination of GBV data, I'd like to report that the National Gender and Equality Commission has that is sexual gender-based violence information system that is currently being reviewed to add more indicators. And this has been made possible with support from partners, that is the Equality Now, HI, just to mention a few. Now, we hope that once this system is up and running, we shall be able to collect data on gender-based violence. And we have key stakeholders on board. We will be working closely with the police, ODPP, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, just to mention a few. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say that there have been fragmented efforts when it comes to pushing for women economic empowerment agenda in our country, because we have different partners doing the same thing, and it means that we are duplicating efforts. But I'm happy to say that we have the national rehab advocacy, whereby it's bringing all the stakeholders working around women economic ecosystem, whereby we have the academia, researchers, the CSOs, the women's movement coming together to analyze the data that has been collected into clear policy actions to inform interventions. So I'm happy we can use that existing structure to push for everything that is going around women economic empowerment. And then on the issue of public participation is a major issue. Because I'm aware and I'm very intentional that the government has been given 2% allocation to conduct public participation. But whenever you start questioning, the issue that comes around is that they don't have money. And you know, when they don't have money, when it comes to even the time that, because right now we are in the third generation of CIDP, and if women are not being involved, women do not participate, it means their issues are not going to be captured. So this is a wake-up call for all of us to ensure that in terms of civic education, I know there are different CSOs that are doing civic education or public participation, because when you see the structure that has been put in place when it comes to civic public participation, of course, it does not accommodate women. Because even these women, they do not even have information about public participation. And in terms of information, normally it's being shared on WhatsApp, and sometimes it's at midnight. And some of these women who normally suffer are women living in the informal sector. They don't even have gadgets like the Android phone whereby they can have access to such information. So if the civil society organization can come up and start doing civic education, I know Raia Trust is doing that. And also Africa Youth Trust, we are working with young urban women in the informal sector of Nairobi and Mombasa. At the same time, we are also working with the women's movement, whereby we are able to take them through the importance of public participation, doing budget tracking and analysis. And also right now we are supposed to start doing capacity building on public expenditure management, whereby they are able to interact with these documents. We've also analyzed the CIDP 1 and CIDP 2, especially on sectors that impact on women economic empowerment to inform CIDP 3. So I'm very happy that we were able to submit the memorandum and the document was adopted in this CIDP 3. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll respond to two questions. One is the use of technology when it comes to women economic empowerment, and the second question is on the education of children, especially for unpaid care and domestic work. When it comes to technology and women economic empowerment, these I'll touch a bit on SGBB. Currently, we have a consortium working with three partners, that's CCGG, KUWEE, and Jasiri, where we give women funds, it's like a guaranteed fund, but for survival violence. We give them funds through mobile application, that's through M-Pesa. And one of the things we've seen most is, especially women in rural areas, they don't have access to M-Pesa, or most of them, their numbers are registered under the spouse's details, which means it's the spouse who will access the funds. So when we are talking about empowering women economically, but that money does not get to the woman, and when that woman requests for the funds to run the business, she is violated. So that's also one challenge when we talk about technology. We really have to be keen to look at, really need have to, of course, data has mentioned, we'll have to find out these mobile M-Pesa, especially M-Pesa applications that are registered. is the money reaching the beneficiary, or is it reaching someone else? That has been a challenge to us, and I'm posing to all of us here to look into that. And hopefully subsequently we will be seeing less of GBV cases when it comes to financial responsibility, I'll put it in a household level. The second question is about unpaid care work. First, we have to recognize the burden of unpaid care work on women. And when we recognize that, then we'll be able to break it down so that it comes out. It's when a woman leaves the kid to go look for work, it's not that the woman is abandoning this kid. And I'll pick an example for what Professor Dress mentioned about the childcare in the Rakanithi market, Chuka market. We can use such facilities where we can work, partners can work with the government to come up with childcare facilities in markets, childcare facilities, even in our own organizations, where women can bring their kids to work. And it does not mean I must quit my job so that I have to take care of my child. How can we recognize it? And at the moment, there's the national policy on unpaid care work currently being developed by different stakeholders led by the government. That is one of the ways to recognize the burden of unpaid care work. And then the other thing is when we also talk about the burden, we also have to, how can we ensure this distribution of care work at home? We have to start with where you are. How can we ensure this distribution of it? The men also have to understand the care work is not only meant for women. I know this is a social norm. This is something we have been brought up thinking, but also men have to be educated. They have to be empowered that by the mere fact that you can do care work does not mean you're a less human being. So they need to be recognize that, and we work towards helping women so that they can empower themselves economically. We'll still be talking about the implications of women now, bringing it back to putting it's all on women. It's all the responsibility of women.
Thank you so much. And I want to conclude by picking from where we have stopped. Then the question of whether children will suffer if mothers are not taking care of them. I think we also want to clearly stereotype. Mothers and children have a very limited relationship. If you listen to WHO, breastfeeding should only take 6 months, exclusive to breastfeeding. After 6 months, the mother has nothing to do with the child. The child should just grow. And the child will be taken care by anybody else with 2 hands. Even robots are taking care of children in their family. So, and I want to announce this. Fortunately, the bill on child unpaid care work is currently being developed. There is a group right now in Manzoni which is discussing it, and to help women progress in careers and still give back, because that's the only role they have, by the way. You either pay for the unpaid care work, you can compensate women. I don't have to leave my child if I'm still paid. That care work is recognized. Women will still do it. There is nothing wrong with doing, care work. After all, it's comfortable. You're doing it at the comfort of your home. But anyway, who recognizes it as work? So that is where we should be advocating for. And the National Advocacy Coalition is part of that project. And KUWEE is part of the National Advocacy Coalition. We are pushing towards that. The next thing I want to conclude is we want to herald KNBS for recognizing this citizen generated data. Because again, KNBS is good. It gives the statistics. How many women are abused? If you ask KNBS, it will tell you. But nobody knows the stories behind those abused women. So what we have is clean. We are going beyond mere statistics. We are listening to the stories. And one key point I will give you recently, we have done a study on women who have gone through GBV and have gone through rehabilitation programs. And what everybody is advocating for and telling women, oh, we have to end GBV, We have to take these perpetrators and jail them. We have to do APCD. We talked to the women. And as I'm sitting here, that information is being disseminated at the Makueni County government because this is where the research was done. Women said, we don't want to leave our husbands, even if they are beating us. Why? You lose marital status. You're also going to have children grow without fathers. So women still want to stay with these men. And people keep on asking, why do women stay in abused relationships? Social cultural norms. So we want to go deeper as a hub and listen to the community. Community generated. What are people saying? What is that called Wajiko saying? And therefore, policies must be Wajiko driven. If Wajiko wants to stay with a man, yet this man is abusive, maybe the focus is not on Wajiko, the focus should be on this man. Take this man to a rehab, let him stay with his children, let him take care of his children. Maybe it is not the woman who needs to go to a rehabilitation center, it's the man. But when you look at the just mere statistics, it's taking us differently. And so the role of the rehab is to get down, and I will repeat again, get down to the nitty-gritty of data, interpret qualitative data by listening to the stories, and actually using those stories to inform government policy. Thank you.
We started the day with an introduction to what KUWEE does. I think the story I take from each of those presentations is fast. Largely speaking, the question about whether gaps exist is solved. There's insufficient data, we may say, but we are clear gaps exist. It's also in the interest of, quote unquote, I don't know, there's nobody called society, but it's in our common interest to close those gaps. So that's one part. We also learned that part of making these conversations more useful is to actually have data. Facts are useful. To supplement that data with, as you said, the narratives of the people who actually, whose lives are represented by that data. And that story tells us, it's not always a sad story because as we say, the data showed us some positive steps are made, opening up more opportunities for women to work is actually not just useful to themselves, it helps the family as well, as we saw in that. The question about the compact and about the conversation about who controls what resources that come from that is still a conversation. It's a household, it's household level, but at least government and all of us being aware of it is essential for surfacing debate so that we can all debate meaningfully. We as well, I think, is here beyond today. So by we, I mean we. If I say the other we, I'm by year, so you're not talking about this. But we will be here, and it's an organization and an institution. We at the IEA make a distinction between organization and institutions. You're an institution when you actually have rules and regulations and mechanisms of doing stuff that is recognized beyond your walls. Well, so if it creates that, obviously it will give us an opportunity to close the gaps. I think conversations about what this means and why there's contestation about what it means for man, boy, child, those conversations absent of data is a different point. And I'll conclude with this. The IEA prepared a report, which is a compilation of what we call 52 economic fallacies, based on this same thing. And as Professor Gary has said, that sometimes common narratives can make it to town, and yet the facts tell you a different thing. So we have our work cut out for us, in the belief that when you talk about closing gaps, you're supposed to be regressing the progress of men, all certain groups of people, but it isn't. I think talking about what the total gain will be for everybody. In my preparation for these meetings today, I read an article I didn't complete it, but it's a nice dense 40-page article in which they spoke about Bangladesh and say that if you could just close the income gap in Bangladesh, right? It's a big country, obviously, graduated to middle income, I think in the year of COVID, interestingly enough. But if you close that income gap, that country would be 30% bigger in terms of the size of the economy. And for someone who's a student of economics and class thinks that I know a little bit about that data, I mean, my jaw just dropped to the floor. And that perhaps is one of the ways in which we can actually surface this conversation. So the qualitative conversations, these conversations do many things. It helps us to understand our potential. It helps us to care for people who are being bullied, right? But more importantly, I think the biggest thing about us in Kenya is we run conversations on narratives and strong feeling. And data, whether qualitative or quantitative, helps us to say, fine, this is your feeling, and you perfectly entitled to that, but these are the facts. So let's now have a conversation. And you start a conversation by agreeing on what the facts are, and then the implications of things that we can do that. So my applause to all the 5 ladies who given us a fantastic view about what different perspectives are. They work professionally in this area. And the fact that we have all these people working in this tells you that this is a big job, and many of us should also help them to push it forward. So I'll conclude by thanking Kenyatta University. Thank you very much for planning for us to meet here. And I think God's blessings for the work you do in women's economic employment. You may think it's an insignificant thing, but I think it has to go into a bigger one and quote unquote, right, percolate into the rest of our society. So thank you very much.